From our studio in New Orleans, Louisiana, my name is Harmon Dash. Welcome to Make It Fair. The United States of America, home to 4.4% of the world's population, but we house 25% of the world's prison population. And here in Louisiana, per capita, we top the globe in terms of our incarceration rate. 5 times that of Iran, 13 times that of China's, 20 times the incarceration rate of Germany. So with all these criminals behind bars, we must be living in a near crime-free environment, right? No, quite the opposite. Crime rates are on the rise in our state and across the nation. So if it's not making us safer, what's the motivation behind our lock-em-up attitude? Here in Louisiana, the only state in the U.S. to utilize a privatized for-profit system, the hidden engine behind the state's well-oiled prison machine is cold, hard cash, a constant influx of human beings necessary to maintain this $182 million industry. It was only 25 years ago Louisiana's incarceration rate was half what it is now. But with far fewer facilities to house those inmates at the time, overcrowding was at the point where the federal courts were forced to step in and order a correction, leaving our state with 2 options: lock up fewer people or build more prisons. Louisiana chose the latter. But with the state lacking the funds for building, it turned to local sheriffs to foot the construction bills in return for future profits. With incentives so great, the corrections jobs so sought after, new prisons began popping up all over Louisiana's rural communities. The financial incentives allow for a high concentration of Louisiana law enforcement to be financed with dollars legally skimmed off the top of prison operations. Meaning, if the inmate count dips, sheriffs bleed money. Thus, any measure put forth to decrease the number of people behind bars has been unsuccessful, largely due to the pushback from our state's powerful prison lobby. The result of this environment? 1 in 86 adult Louisianans is doing time, nearly double the national average. Among black men from New Orleans, 1 in 14 is behind bars, 1 in 7 either in prison, on parole, or on probation. It's a continuation of a history that has always seen black people used as currency in these United States. From slavery to sharecropping to the prison system, it's a business. And a business operates best on efficiency, the bottom line given top consideration, regardless of how it treats the human beings necessary for achieving its financial goals. This has led to a justice system that can indiscriminately render sentences that far outweigh the crimes committed. A system that doesn't offer parole for felony convictions under any circumstances until 85% of an inmate's term has been served. A system that rips families apart, sentences children to incomplete households, or worse yet, no household at all, being thrown into the system themselves, exponentially increasing their chance of growing up the next generation of bedfillers for our industrial prison complex. It's a form of institutional genocide. But perhaps none of these details bother you? Well, maybe this will. Louisiana taxpayers spent $700 million last year on prisons. Which brings us to our next guest, Fox Rich, author of the book The One That Got Away, a true story of personal transformation, here to tell her story of how she and her family were impacted by Louisiana's system of injustice. So as promised, we are lucky to be joined by the incomparable Fox Rich. You mind if I use that adjective to describe you?
Please do, please do.
Okay. So we just passed back in September the 20th anniversary of a pretty pivotal moment in your life. What happened last September 20 years ago?
September 20 years ago, my family found ourselves in the cusp of Louisiana's criminal justice system. And probably up until that point, I would have to tell you, Harmon, that like most citizens in Louisiana, I believe that, whatever time people got in our criminal justice system, they got what they deserved. Mm-hmm. And I believe that people that had gone to jail deserved to be in jail. So much so that when the Clinton crime bill was on the ballot in the early 90s, I quickly voted for violent offenders to serve 85% of their time, for juveniles to be sentenced at the age of 17 as adults, and also for people to be multi-bill. If you had committed more than one felony, then you should be locked up for a longer period of time, until I found my family locked in this system. And my first day in court, September 20th, 1997, September 16th, 1997, I then realized how wrong I was.
So once you actually got to experience the justice system in Louisiana, it didn't feel like it was living up to the word justice?
Oh my God, understatement there. If you have not used your participation as a citizen to sit inside some of these criminal proceedings that we have, you are doing a disservice to your citizenship by not participating.
Well, tell us what the event was that caused you to get tangled up in the justice system here.
For us, I mean, we were a new family that had just made a bad choice. I've been with my husband since I was 16 years old. I am now the ripe age of 46 now. So we have been together for 20 years, 30 years. And after being together for 10 years, we married and bought our first home, opened our first business, and then the investor that we had for our expansion of our first business pulled out on us 6 weeks before the expansion was supposed to take place. We were novice business people, so we didn't understand that it needed more than a handshake, the verbal agreement.
So you had nothing in writing
We
that said
had
that he was
nothing-
guaranteed to...
Nothing in
So
writing.
your investor left and you found yourself...
Stuck.
Okay.
Like, what in the world do we do? Your whole life is spiraling out of control. At the same time, our 1-year-old was in the hospital with an undiagnosed ailment. We just, I mean, it's like the whole world. We went from this fairy tale story of being with our high school sweetheart to this tremendous nightmare, stepping out on faith and wanting to, build upon being the American dream. And when all else for funding failed for us, from asking family members to seeking loans to taking out a loan on our mortgages, we panicked, and the thought came across. My husband said, well, before I let my family fail, I will try and take the money that we need. And they say, be careful of a thought that you're planted, because it just may grow. And that's what it did. So at that point, we realized that if we were not going to be seen as failures in our community, if we were not going to fail at this business, then we would have to try and get the money that we needed. And that involved a property crime that led us to prison. We attempted to regain financial solvency for our business and our family by taking the money we needed from a bank.
Okay, so an attempted bank robbery. Tell us about that day. Like, what happened?
Oh my goodness. I mean, it's like one of those things. Some people I've heard or I've read in some different capacities that for some people, it may take a lifetime for them to get it. For some people, it may be a few years behind bars. For some people, it could be as simple as just the moment that they are in the police car, that the lights come on and they get it. And for us, it was that moment immediately after I dropped my husband off and his nephew to go into the bank. I knew at that moment that, oh my goodness, this is not what, it's like coming up from insanity and saying, whoa. But it was too late to stop. My husband went in.
You already dropped them off, so that made you an accessory to the crime.
Yes.
And then they committed the crime. How fast did all this go before they were captured?
When they say that your life can change in the drop of a hat, it was literally a drop of the hat. As they were trying to enter the bank, the teller saw them come in. They immediately called the police. Before I had made it up the street good, I saw the police flying by me on their way to the bank. In all of 5 minutes, they had captured my husband and his nephew. They had surrendered, actually, and regained the $5,000 that my husband had taken out of the bank.
Okay, so there's no issue here with you admitting to the crime. It seems to have ended as quickly as it started. Nobody was physically hurt.
Well, you know, Harmon, anytime that there is an act of violence, which an armed robbery is,
Sure.
you know, people are terrified. We cannot even begin to place a value on that. But no one received medical treatment in the act that my husband and his nephew committed.
Well, so that's important because, when we're thinking about sentencing, we want to know about what the details of the crime were.
What they call mitigating circumstances.
Exactly. So tell me, you're now under arrest, and what happens next?
We immediately, my husband and his nephew are in. I turned myself in with a lawyer. I mean, within 30 days, which is literally in the criminal justice system unheard of, we entered guilty pleas to quickly accept responsibility for what we had done so that we could get this behind us. My husband and I and my nephew took a plea deal for 10 to 18 years of a sentence for them and 5 years probation for my involvement in the incident.
Well, so you say 10 to 18 years, okay, but we're now at the past the 20-year mark of this moment in your life, and your husband is still in prison.
Well, this is the piece about the criminal justice system here in Louisiana. No sooner than we enter our guilty pleas and are ready to assume responsibility, a lawyer comes along who has some notoriety in the community and meets with my husband and I and tells us that he can get my husband home sooner than the deal we had just taken because of his relationships. Unfortunately, we knew nothing about the law. The law would have, if knowledge of the law would have said to us that we have been boycotted, and that is when you admit that you're guilty, you do what's called a boycotization, and it's when you tell the courts everything you did in the commission of the crime. You admit your guilt and you lay out exactly what you had done. Well, by us having been boycotted and shared the details of what we had done with the courts, there is no way, I mean, that's why they give you this plea deal. You tell us what you did and we're going to give you a set amount of time.
Of course.
So the lawyer comes in and he says, well, I can get you a better deal, but it was untrue. He was just lying to us to get more money. And once we couldn't pay him any more money after he had us withdraw our guilty pleas in hopes of reuniting our family sooner, he withdrew from our matter and did not put our plea deal back in place, leaving the district attorney's office totally upset with us, and now having
with all that evidence now, because
everything that they needed to gain a conviction, we had given them out of our own mouths. And so at that point, they had no incentive to offer my husband and I and my nephew another deal, and they forced him into trial. At this point, we've got no money. We know we cannot afford to have a public defender. So I get a college friend of mine who had just passed the bar exam in October to stand in for us, thinking that, it would at least just give us some time before trial to get some money together to have proper representation. The judge wouldn't allow him, the novice who had never tried a case before, who our lives hung in his hands, would not allow him off of our matter. And so they forced us to trial. And when the trial was over, they sentenced my husband to 60 years in prison as a first-time felony offender and a crime that nobody received medical treatment in, less than lonely there being a loss of life.
Well, and to this moment, yourself, your husband, your nephew who was involved in the crime, completely clean records prior to this moment.
Yes.
And it seems to me that shouldn't there be some sort of stopgap when someone comes in, a lawyer of, it seems like, with a decent reputation in the community says to you, oh, I can offer you, make you a promise that could never be kept, and then cause you to be put in this position.
Harmon, we exist in our culture. We exist where a prosecutor can withhold evidence in a matter that would prove a person's innocence and they not be charged. They have prosecutorial amnesty. We have in our system where a prosecutor can actually plant evidence and not be held liable for his actions. No charges brought up against them. We have countless numbers of prosecutorial misconduct in the state of Louisiana, in particular in the city of New Orleans, where our current district attorney is sending out fake subpoenas to make witnesses come and testify. We have a current district attorney that is arresting people, witnesses, victims of crimes, for them not wanting to testify against people that have raped them. So in this climate, it's unfair.
Well,
and the cards are definitely stacked against you, even if you're willing to pay your debt to society. The question then becomes, who determines how much you're supposed to pay?
Well, and you tell me 60 years, like I said, clean records, trauma may have been caused, but nobody got hurt physically, there was no medical attention. And 60 years, I mean, how old was your husband when this went down?
He was 28.
So
he is 48 now.
Okay, so 60 years is pretty much a life sentence. That's, if you're not going to get out for 60 years, you'd be 88.
Yes. And the life expectancy of a black male in Louisiana is only 68. So you've given him, I think that Pope Francis said it best, that a life sentence, which is what my husband got, a virtual life sentence, is just a death sentence in disguise.
But in the meantime, a bed is filled, and what happens to prisoners in there, regardless of why they're in there.
I just think that, that's why it's so important, the work that we have been doing, our family has been doing, and that is pushing for geriatric parole. Any person that has served 20 years in a prison system in Louisiana, and they are at least 45 years of age, which scientists have said that criminal menopause sets in at the age of 35. So 10 years behind criminal menopause. Is the age of which a person should be able to, and used to be able to, be considered for parole consideration in our state. So if you've served 20 years, you're 45 years of age. Because our criminal justice system historically has been found wrong in so many areas, from how they sentence people to how they charge people to wrongful convictions to prosecutorial misconduct, there has to be a relief valve, a safety net in this system that says that just in case somebody gets stuck in our system, which we know they are, which we know they have been, we have to have some mechanism in place that will allow them to be heard from again and have an opportunity to return home and return back to society.
What do you think the motivation is for for this web that seems to entangle people?
There's no doubt about it that black, poor in Louisiana are the new cotton. I mean, the statistics say it, the studies say it, it's not my own. And then from an emotional standpoint, I experience it. My husband calls me every morning. I want to know that he's okay. In a world where everybody is talking free, I have to pay $3.25 to have a 15-minute conversation with my husband. And just so happen, if one of our 6 sons wants to share with him what's going on in a day, we can spend anywhere from $10 to $20 just on family communication and maintaining family ties.
You bring up the children that are affected by this. I mean, nobody asks to be born into a desperate situation, but suddenly you are one, maybe both parents are taken by this justice system for whatever reason. Doesn't that kind of repeat a cycle? Aren't these kids now vulnerable to possibly growing up into desperate situations that make them commit crimes as well?
Harmon, I served on the governor's board for juvenile justice and delinquency prevention under 2 governors for almost 8 years. And 85% of all children that are locked up have a parent locked up. So, I mean, you don't need any more statistics to tell us that if you are taking the parents away, then you've got to put something back, some type of protectors or safeguards around these children that are remaining, because they're not going out and committing the crimes. So as a civil society, it is them that we must, make sure that we see after, make sure that we finish. It's kind of as if a child is born in the hospital and the mother passes away in childbirth. Well, we don't put that child out on the curb.
Right.
Social services has to come in and make sure that that child is taken care of. And we are not doing it in our criminal justice system. At no point did the judge ask me, knowing I had been pregnant with twins, knowing that I had given birth to twins, left them at home, along with the children that I already had, my husband and I. Nobody asked about them in my sentencing process. Nobody asked where they were going to go or who was going to be responsible for their care. And as a system, if you're going to snatch a human being out of society, it has to be our responsibility to put safeguards around those that will be left behind and impacted.
It just seems like this is an opportunity to fill more beds later. We're, setting up the next generation.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
And that is just a shame.
I just think we could do better.
We can.
When you know better, you do better. At one time, we thought that slavery was okay. At least we tolerated it. And then it got to a point where we realized that this is not acceptable for us to hold other human beings in captivity for our own profit and good and greed. So the same thing applies here. We use the disguise of criminal.
Right.
That's the new horrific
it's a
label.
rationale for setting up something
black
that's like
used to be the rationale.
Right.
Oh, so they are a darker hue than us, so God made them lesser than us, and that way it gives us and our law says that they're 3/5 of a human being now, just like property. So we don't have to treat them with the same humanity because they're not human. Our law, our Constitution says that they are less than human. And that's what, it's the same thing with criminals. Criminals are less than a human, so we don't have to treat them humanely.
But then you're sentencing the kids too. That you're
These
saying
citizens society.
your parents, we already see them as less than, so therefore we're going to see you as less than, and we're not going to protect you.
Do you know in the 1800s and the early 1900s that if a slave woman went to prison, she went with her slave child until the child was 10 years old. Once the child that was born to a inmate at a prison, once that child reached 10, that child then went to the auction block and was sold off to fund white public school systems.
We'd like to think that we've gotten far, far away from
We
those
would,
days,
wouldn't we?
and in some ways we have, but clearly there
We got
have
a
been
long
other
way to go.
methods, other paths to similar dehumanizing effects that we've had on our society. Well, so what I'm hearing is
It's money
being generated,
money.
free labor.
Oh, don't forget the free labor. My husband works every day, Harmon, and I have to put money on his books because he can't eat out of the cafeteria. The quality of food that they have been serving the population now has shriveled over the 2 decades he's been behind bars.
More money, cutting costs on the supplies.
To a point where there was a newspaper article a few years back under the old administration, the old warden, who was soliciting bidders to start serving fake meat to the prisons. And the reason why he didn't follow through on the bid was because the company that was going to give him kickbacks was not the company that put in the lowest bid, so they didn't get the offer. So since the company that was going to give him the kickbacks on the purchases did not get the offer, he did away with the contract to start serving fake meat to the men at Angola. I went yesterday to add more stamps. They have a system called JPay that also makes money off of families like mine. So in JPay, you have to buy stamps to email. Picture that, huh? Buy stamps to email. Now, email is free, right? Have you ever heard of anybody paying for email? Not since
now.
AOL first came out back in the early 90s and you were paying to actually be online. So here we are, the poorest. We pay 33 cents to email a loved one.
Well, in preparing for this interview, my producer Tracy and I were doing some research on all this, and here we have this for-profit prison system. They're making a lot of money, and you've illustrated some of those examples, yet it appears the actual amount of money spent on the prisoners themselves, about half as much as pretty much every other state in the country. So the money is coming in, it is not going out.
And then you talk about recidivism. You spend no money investing in these people, trying to retrain them, trying to give them some substance abuse treatment, trying to stabilize their lives so that when they come back, they can be rehabilitated, productive members of society. And instead, you cut all of the spending, charge the families more money. It is definitely a big money-making bag. And what is really disheartening about the process is that where other states may have private prisons, those private prisons are owned by corporations. Here in Louisiana, over half of our prisoners are kept in privately owned facilities, but those privately owned facilities are owned by our sheriffs. So the Sheriff's Association and the District Attorneys Association are in bed with one another to make sure that we do not decarcerate Louisiana. And so I just think that viewers here with Make It Fair clearly have to understand that if you are concerned about public safety, if you are concerned about how the money of our great state is being spent, then you cannot sit idly by and buy into this logic that everybody behind bars deserves to be there and that you got whatever time you deserve, because that is just not how a civil society operates, and it's not benefiting any of us. We've led the world in incarceration for almost 30 years. But yet we still lead the world in homicides. We still lead the world in gun violence. We still lead the world in domestic violence against women. So
it's not making us safer. So there's got to be something else at work.
But those are the things that I think everyday citizens have got to get involved in. You've got to see that this is just as important as your children's education. Because if we don't invest in our people and change their lives around, then we become their prey. A hungry man is gonna eat one way or the other. So either we set the table and help them, or we fall by the wayside and we fall prey to their decisions.
Well, and I think, I want to go back to your point earlier and just make it again that, we're not here condoning law breaking. We want people to be law abiding, of course. But who decides what the right amount of punishment is? What's the right amount of time for the crime? And it looks like that the opportunity to make money, greed, corrupting the whole system. Some things just can't be for profit. And when you're talking about human lives, even prisoners, we can't let profit be the motivation for how we're going to operate.
Some things you should not have profits tied to them because it incentivizes the inhumane treatment that people in Louisiana are receiving. And it's a generational thing. If you remove the fathers from the home, or if you remove the mothers, in particular in the Black community, the highest increase in people going to prison are women, Black women at that. And if a Black woman is the primary caretaker of the family, statistics say that 68% of all households, African American households, are headed by women. If you remove that woman, you have destroyed the family. You destabilize it when you remove the male, but you destroy that family when you remove the woman, and then you orphan those children. Because if she's not fortunate enough to have a family member like I did, who would take care of the children in the mother's absence, then they are put into a foster care system, and the mother has to work to try and regain custody of those children when she gets back home.
Which is an uphill battle in
addition to trying to find employment, trying to find housing, because you are a felon, you no longer qualify for this job, 400 different licensings in Louisiana you are disqualified for when you have a felony conviction. So my question becomes that if you told me, as in my case, I took a plea deal for 2 7-year sentences and 1 5-year sentence run together. I was set to serve 3.5 years in the women's prison. I complete my time. I've been home from prison for 15 years now. But because I am a felon, I'm still serving time. So if I did what the state asked of me, what the state required of me, then why is it that when I come home and I'm on parole, I still can't vote? But I'm a citizen and I still have to pay taxes. Why is it when I come home, I have to check the box that I'm formally incarcerated, or on my apartment or rental application, or even on college applications, I have to say that I'm a formally incarcerated person? I served my time. Then I should be able to go and be restored fully to the community I came from.
Well, and another thing that strikes me too is that, education has not been prioritized as a whole. We see it across the nation. You clearly are someone who can advocate for yourself, and still you're fighting a battle that feels like it's completely uphill. What happens to people that can't advocate for themselves?
Harmon, I never met a person that could not read or write until I got to prison. I come from a family of educators. My mother's a teacher, all of my aunts are teachers. So to get to prison and meet somebody that literally could not add a 75-cent soup with a $1.25 pack of cigarettes with a pad of paper and some stamps was mind-boggling to me. And I said, oh my God, people are illiterate in the 21st century?
Right.
And then, the tie back end is these small parish prisons and these small jails that people are serving extended periods of time in do not have the capacity, nor do they even try to spend the money it is required to rehabilitate our citizens. So no, you cannot advocate for yourself. You can't even figure out how to get out of this system. Because the odds are stacked up against you. I have 2 college degrees. My BS is in biology, my master's is in public administration, and yet when I found myself in the courtroom and I am listening to the legal jargon, I still had absolutely no clue or understanding of what. I didn't understand the language. And so you have uneducated people. How do you expect them to understand the language?
It doesn't appear like there's a want for them to understand what's happening. Am I getting that right?
You're getting that right. Over $700 million we spent on prisons in the state of Louisiana, and we're not any safer. We had the largest criminal reform package ever presented in Louisiana this past legislative session. And then all of a sudden you hear sheriffs like Sheriff Prater out of Cattle Parish calling a news conference to warn people like he didn't know, like the Sheriff's Association was not at the table with every measure that they put in the bill to pass through the legislature. So he acts as if he is totally surprised and taken off guard by this, and makes an announcement that they are releasing this astronomical amount of people from prison on November 1st, which actually equates to the prison reform package that they put together is only going to release 10,000 people over 10 years.
So 1,000 a year, but
We're decreasing the prison population by 10% over the next decade. Like really, you just really open up the floodgates,
Absolutely.
right? And then he goes on to say, and I'm not really upset about that, but his quote says that, but they're even letting the good ones go. The ones that you can work, the ones that can cook for us and change the oil in our cars and wash our cars. They're even gonna let the good ones go.
So the problem with prison reform is not necessarily that hardened criminals who are going to do bad things are coming out, but the people who do our work for us, our laborers that are good at those jobs, are not going to be there for us.
Yeah, the free labor. And the money that I get for them filling my bed. After they released those people, what they did was Department of Correction then began shipping people from the prison to fill those beds in the sheriff's parish jails to make sure that they have the quota that they need in order to be sustainable.
Wow.
Human beings, even if they are prisoners, are not a commodity. They are humans. And when we begin to treat human beings as a commodity, we have slave trade all over again. Make It Fair's got work to do.
We do.
You got a big responsibility to get this message out there and let this project go forth and be heard. More voices like Make It Fair have got to be out there, and we thank you for the work that you guys are doing.
And we thank you for being part of this voice. Well, you have plenty to say on the dehumanization process, and as a speaker, you have an event coming up next week, I believe.
Yes, I'm so excited about it. We will be the guest speaker at Tulane University in the Rogers Memorial Chapel at 7 p.m. December the 12th. We are sponsored by NOLA Gulf South, and it's going to be an amazing event where the New York Times has commissioned a documentary on my story and the story of my family. And so that we will be culminating our filming at that event as well. So it is author and abolitionist, a conversation with Fox Rich. I do hope that the Make It Fair viewership can come out and join us. It's going to be a night to remember.
A chance to see Fox Rich live. Thank you so much for joining us, and continued luck to you and your family.
Thank you, Harmon.
We'd love to have you come back for some commentaries and just be part of our Make It Fair family.
Make It Fair is the best, and you guys are not getting rid of me.
Nor do we want to. That's Fox Rich, The One That Got Away, a true story of personal transformation. You can pick up the book now. For Make It Fair, my name is Harmon Dash. Thank you for watching.